The grand ballroom shimmered under golden chandeliers, each crystal catching the light and throwing it across the polished marble floor. Round tables covered in white silk were arranged with perfect symmetry. At the front of the hall stood a wide stage with a massive digital screen displaying the logo of the International Business Summit. Waiters moved quietly between tables, adjusting glasses and refilling water before the event officially began. Guests from different countries filled the room. Designers in tailored suits, investors with sharp expressions, and executives speaking in low, serious voices. Cameras from business media lined one side of the hall. Everyone was waiting for one man. When the doors at the back opened, the noise in the room softened instantly. The Arab billionaire stepped inside with calm authority. He wore a perfectly pressed dark suit, and his presence alone changed the air in the room. Two security officers walked a few steps behind him. People stood up without being asked. Some nodded with respect. Others simply watched carefully. Near the stage stood a young event coordinator holding a tablet close to her chest. She had been on her feet since early morning, checking every detail twice. She wasn't from a wealthy background. She had worked hard to earn this position, and today was the biggest event of her career. Her palms felt slightly warm, but her posture remained straight. She reminded herself to breathe slowly. As the billionaire took his reserved seat near the front, the main presentation began. The host welcomed everyone warmly. Applause followed. The large screen behind the stage lit up, and the first slides appeared. For a few seconds, everything looked perfect. Then something went wrong. Instead of showing the billionaire's company profile, the screen suddenly displayed financial charts from a competing firm. Confused whispers spread across the ballroom. The host froze mid-sentence. The technician at the control table stared at the monitor in panic, tapping the keyboard quickly. The young coordinator felt her stomach drop. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had personally checked the presentation files an hour ago. Somehow, the system had switched folders. On the front row, the billionaire's expression changed. His jaw tightened. He leaned back slowly, eyes fixed on the screen. The wrong slides continued to flash for a few seconds that felt much longer. He stood up. The movement alone silenced the entire hall. Without touching the microphone, he began speaking sharply in Arabic. His voice was controlled but clearly angry. Most of the audience did not understand the words, but they understood the tone. It carried disappointment, frustration, and insult. He said that respect in business was not optional. He questioned how such a careless mistake could happen at an event meant to honor international partnerships. His words were not shouted, but they cut through the silence. The technicians finally corrected the screen, but the damage felt done. The billionaire stepped away from his chair and adjusted his jacket. He spoke a few more firm words in Arabic, clearly stating that he would not tolerate disrespect. Then he turned toward the exit. The host tried to say something into the microphone, but his voice trembled. A few investors exchanged worried looks. Cameras quietly captured everything. Social media teams near the back began typing quickly on their phones. The young coordinator felt hundreds of eyes shift toward her. She knew the responsibility would fall on her shoulders. She had approved the final presentation order. Even if the error was technical, she was in charge. As the billionaire walked toward the tall glass doors at the end of the hall, the sound of his shoes against the marble floor echoed softly. Each step felt like the collapse of months of preparation, and no one dared to stop him. The sound of his footsteps continued toward the exit, steady and firm. The tall glass doors were only a few steps away. No one moved. No one spoke. It felt like the entire ballroom had forgotten how to breathe. The young coordinator stood frozen for half a second, her heart racing so loudly she could almost hear it. She knew that if he walked out, the summit would collapse. Investors would pull back. The media would turn the story into a public embarrassment. Months of planning would disappear in a single headline. She didn't fully plan what she was about to do, It came from instinct more than courage. Before she could doubt herself, she stepped forward. "Sir," she called out. Her voice was calm, not loud, but clear enough to reach him. He did not stop. Then she spoke again, this time in fluent Arabic. "Please, give me one moment. What happened was a technical failure, not a sign of disrespect." The words flowed naturally, with the smooth accent of someone who had spent years around the language. The tone was respectful, steady, and sincere. His steps slowed. The security officers looked at each other, surprised. The entire hall fell even quieter than before. Even those who did not understand Arabic could feel something had changed. He stopped just before the door, but did not turn around. She continued, still in Arabic. "You were invited here with honor. We prepared for your presence with great care. The error on the screen does not reflect our intentions." Her hands were steady now. The fear that had gripped her earlier was slowly being replaced by focus. She wasn't speaking to impress anyone. She was speaking because she believed what she was saying. He turned slightly, enough to look at her over his shoulder. There was no anger in her face, no panic, only responsibility. "Who taught you Arabic?" he asked, still in the same language. His voice was no longer sharp, but it remained serious. "My father worked in the Gulf region for many years," she replied. "I grew up hearing it at home. I studied it properly later because I believed language builds bridges." A few people in the audience who understood Arabic began whispering quietly. Others looked confused, waiting for translation. He turned fully now, facing her. His expression was searching, measuring. "You are responsible for this event?" he asked. "I am part of the organizing team," she answered honestly. "And I approved the presentation order. The mistake is mine to carry." There was no excuse in her voice, no blame placed on technicians or assistants, just ownership. The billionaire studied her carefully. He was used to people shifting responsibility the moment something went wrong. He had seen executives throw junior staff under pressure without hesitation. But she stood there, alone. "I spoke harshly," he said slowly. "Did you understand everything I said?" "Yes," she answered softly. "And you were right to expect professionalism." We failed in that moment. The honesty in her reply did something unexpected. It did not defend, it did not argue, it acknowledged. A quiet tension moved through the room. Cameras were still recording. Investors leaned forward in their seats. She took one small step closer, still keeping respectful distance. "In our culture," she continued gently in Arabic, "honor is shown not only in perfection, but in how we correct our mistakes." The "Iboy" sentence hung in the air. For the first time since the incident, the billionaire's expression shifted. The anger had faded, replaced by thought. The ballroom waited, and in that fragile pause between pride and understanding, everything began to change. The silence in the ballroom felt different now. It was no longer heavy with anger. It was filled with attention. The billionaire stood still, facing the young coordinator. His security team had stepped back slightly, unsure of what would happen next. The audience remained seated, watching every movement. She could feel her heartbeat in her chest, but her voice stayed steady. "In Arabic culture," she continued gently, "there is a saying my father used to repeat to me. He said, 'Dignity is not in never falling. It is in rising with grace.'" The billionaire's eyes narrowed slightly. That was not a common phrase someone memorized from a textbook. It carried warmth. It carried memory. She didn't rush her words. "My father worked far from home for many years," she said. "He respected the people who gave him opportunities. He always told me that when you stand in someone else's house, you protect their honor like your own." A few guests who understood Arabic exchanged surprised glances. The tone of the conversation had changed completely. It was no longer about a presentation error. It was about values. The billionaire slowly walked back toward the center of the hall, not toward the exit this time, but toward her. Every step he took seemed measured. "You speak about honor," he said quietly in Arabic. "But this event embarrassed my company in front of global investors." "You're right," she replied without hesitation. "And if I were in your place, I would feel the same." There was no defense in her answer, no argument. She continued, "But walking away today will not correct the mistake. Allowing us to fix it will show strength." That sentence caused a small shift in the room. Even those who did not understand the language could see something meaningful was happening. He studied her face carefully. He had spent decades building companies across continents. He had seen people flatter him. He had seen people fear him. But this was different. She wasn't trying to impress him. She wasn't trying to protect her job. She was protecting the event, the partnership, and perhaps even his reputation. "Why didn't you blame your technical team?" he asked. "Because leadership means taking responsibility," she answered, "even when it is difficult." Her words were simple. There was no dramatic tone, just truth. For a brief moment, his expression softened. Something in her response reminded him of a voice from long ago. His mother had always said that strength was quiet, that real authority did not need noise. He glanced around the ballroom. Investors were watching closely. Cameras were still recording. If he walked out now, the headlines would focus on anger. If he stayed, they would focus on resilience. He turned back to her. "You are not a senior executive," he said. It was not a question. "No," she admitted. "I am part of the coordination team. And yet you chose to stand in front of me." She gave a small, honest smile. "Someone had to." For the first time since the mistake happened, a faint hint of respect appeared in his eyes. The tension that had gripped the ballroom began to loosen. He looked toward the stage, then back at her. "Correct the presentation," he said calmly, in Arabic. "And let us see if your preparation matches your words." A quiet breath of relief moved through the audience. Even though many did not understand what had just been said, the young coordinator nodded respectfully. "Thank you," she replied in fluent Arabic. "You will not regret staying." And in that moment, the story was no longer about a furious billionaire walking out. It was about a young woman who chose to speak and changed the direction of the room. The technicians moved quickly, their fingers flying across keyboards as they restored the correct presentation. The large screen flickered once, then finally displayed the billionaire's company logo in sharp detail. The hall remained quiet, but the fear that had filled it earlier was slowly being replaced by careful hope. The young coordinator stepped, slightly to the side, giving space as the host returned to the microphone. His voice was steadier now. He welcomed the billionaire back with formal respect and invited him to remain seated as the presentation restarted. The billionaire walked back to his chair, his posture calm but firm. When he sat down, it felt like the entire room exhaled at once. The presentation began again. This time, every slide appeared correctly. Financial growth charts, expansion plans, and international partnerships were displayed clearly. The coordinator stood near the stage, eyes fixed on the screen, making sure nothing else went wrong. Her focus was sharp, almost protective. As the minutes passed, something else shifted. The billionaire leaned forward slightly, listening carefully. His earlier anger had not disappeared completely, but it had transformed into attention. He asked a question midway through the presentation. His tone was serious, but no longer sharp. One of the senior executives answered confidently. The discussion that followed was professional and thoughtful. Investors began taking notes again instead of whispering. When the presentation ended, polite applause filled the ballroom. It was not explosive, but it was sincere. The billionaire stood up once more. This time, no one panicked. He walked slowly toward the stage. The host stepped aside, offering him the microphone. For a brief second, the room wondered what he would say. He looked across the audience, then spoke in English so everyone could understand. In business, he began, his voice calm and controlled, mistakes happen. What defines us is how we respond to them. The room listened closely. Today, I was prepared to leave. I believed my company had been disrespected, but I was reminded that dignity is not only in perfection, it is in responsibility. He paused briefly. A young member of this team chose to stand forward instead of hiding. That is leadership. A soft wave of surprise moved through the audience. Many eyes turned toward the coordinator. She felt heat rise to her face, but kept her expression steady. He continued, "Partnership is not built on flawless events. It is built on trust." Then he made an announcement that no one expected. "My company will move forward with the proposed collaboration." The words landed like a quiet shock. Investors straightened in their seats. A few people clapped immediately, and the applause quickly grew louder. The coordinator felt her shoulders relax for the first time all day. But he was not finished. He turned slightly toward her. "And I would like this young professional to be directly involved in future communications between our teams." A stronger wave of surprise filled the hall. Senior executives exchanged quick glances. Some looked impressed, others looked thoughtful. She blinked, unsure she had heard correctly. He gave a small nod in her direction, not dramatic, not emotional, just respectful. The applause grew louder now, not only for the business deal, but for the moment itself. The balance of power in the room had quietly shifted. What began as public humiliation had turned into recognition, and as the cameras flashed and investors smiled again, one thing was clear. The day that almost ended in disaster was now becoming something no one would forget. The applause slowly faded, but the feeling in the ballroom remained warm. People began standing, shaking hands, and speaking in low, excited voices. What had nearly turned into a public disaster was now being called a powerful moment of leadership. The young coordinator stayed near the side of the stage, trying to process everything that had just happened. Only an hour ago, she thought her career might end before it truly began. Now, her name was being quietly repeated among executives and investors. As the crowd started to thin, one of the billionaire's assistants approached her politely. "He would like a few minutes of your time," the assistant said. Her heartbeat quickened again, but this time it was not from fear. She nodded and followed the assistant to a smaller private lounge connected to the ballroom. The room was quiet, decorated, in soft neutral colors. Through the large windows, the city lights glowed against the evening sky. The billionaire stood near the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Without the cameras and the crowd, he seemed different, still powerful, but more human. When she entered, he turned toward her. "Please sit," he said calmly. She sat across from him, keeping her posture respectful. For a moment, he studied her in silence. Not in a harsh way, but as if trying to understand something deeper. "You surprised me today," he said finally. "I only did what felt right," she answered honestly. He gave a faint nod. Many people know the right thing. Few choose to act on it. He walked slowly to a chair opposite her and sat down. "When I was young," he continued, "my mother used to tell me that strength is shown in moments of pressure, not when everything is smooth." His voice had softened. There was no anger left in it. She believed that respect is something you protect, not demand. The young coordinator listened quietly. She could see that this was not a speech for business. It was something personal. "When you spoke today," he said, "you did not try to impress me. You did not try to defend yourself. You chose responsibility." She looked down for a brief second, then met his eyes again. "I believe that leadership does not wait for a title," she said gently. A small smile appeared on his face. "You remind me of someone who once gave me the same advice," he replied. He leaned back slightly. I would like you to work directly with my international relations team. Cultural communication is important to me. You understand both language and respect. The offer hung in the air. It was not just a job opportunity. It was trust. She felt a wave of emotion rise in her chest, but she kept her voice steady. I am honored, she said. I will work hard to deserve that trust. He nodded, satisfied with the answer. Opportunities test people, he said. Today, you passed a difficult one. They both stood. As she walked back toward the ballroom, she noticed how different everything felt. The same chandeliers, the same marble floor. But the weight she had carried earlier was gone. Colleagues looked at her with new respect. Some smiled. A few even applauded softly as she passed. But what mattered most was not the applause. It was the quiet understanding that one moment of courage had changed the direction of her life. The billionaire did not walk out that day. Instead, he walked, away with renewed respect, and she walked forward with a future she had never expected, all because she chose to speak when silence would have been easier.
Thanks for watching my video. Like, subscribe and share.